Today I'm going to be briefly discussing the book Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko. And basically, this was a book that we were going to read in English class, however, in college, at least for me in my sophomore year, but we never got to it, and I actually wanted to return the book. But ultimately they said, no, we're not taking this book back. So I was kind of stuck with it, and I figured I might as well just read it and see what I think of it. And for the most part, it's interesting, I think, in how the author writes, how there's like this very unstructured kind of way she approaches the format in which she writes, and how there's a lot of detail involved, sort of with the atmosphere and the setting. But overall, as a story, I thought it was just kind of confusing at times, and I did feel that there was some tragedy there, and that there was some elements that the author was really trying to hammer in. But I think there's other books that I think that did a better job of sort of discussing these kinds of things, and I think that just has to do with the fact that it just bounces from one area to another, and I kind of just ended up being confused and not being as engaged into this particular book. But I will go over as to what the book is about and kind of give you a sense of what the author was trying to say. But ultimately, Ceremony is about a World War II veteran, in particular a World War II veteran that is half white and half Native American, who is from the tribe Laguna, and basically his name is Tayo, and I felt personally that he was more of as not as an interesting character as maybe some other stories that I've read. But I think what he goes through is a very depressing struggle, in particular dealing with the fact that he had to go through all of these experiences during World War II, becoming a soldier there, and watching his cousin unfortunately pass away during the war. This ultimately leads to these sort of lifestyles that sort of took place as a result of kind of World War II, in particular with the Indian community, which resulted in a lot of drinking. And there's a lot of drinking involved within this book in particular, and in particular men getting drunk to resolve their problems of, again, being in that war. So basically, in order to sort of get away from this particular problem that Tayo faces as he goes back from this tragedy within his life, he seeks Indian sort of religion, spirituality, and sort of rituals and stories to sort of help him, I guess, cope with the issues that he has. And you'll kind of see how he sort of changes a little as the story goes on, and there's some kind of development with him. I would just say that he's not one of the more interesting characters, at least in my opinion. I didn't feel like there was a whole lot of personality with this character, but despite that, I still think that overall the story executes itself well if you're interested in this kind of writing, because there are some points where it does talk about like Indian folklore, sort of Indian spirituality, and sometimes it can be confusing, especially for me as someone who's not really grown up in the culture. Like, I don't understand certain things that are involved with the Indian culture, and I kind of don't know what certain things represent, and what ultimately certain things ultimately what each of these meanings, or ultimately what these things mean in the context of the Indian culture. So there were certain parts that made it difficult for me to understand. So there is that aspect, I think, that the story kind of suffers from because it's not as clear in how it approaches its writing. It's not really that straightforward. And I do like vague spiritual, interpretive stuff, but for some reason this one didn't grasp me all that much. But again, like it goes from just going on from the story to having like these pages where it just goes into like straight up kind of poetry, except it doesn't rhyme. It's not a rhyming kind of poetry. It's just kind of designed to be these Indian folklore type stories, and I know that they ultimately serve some kind of purpose, and I'm sure that's what the author intended, but for me personally, they didn't engage me all that much, and throughout the book, it's fairly depressing and just very, there are moments where there's like a little bit of, happiness or a little bit of hope that results, and ultimately at the end there is this kind of hope feel that it has to it. But for the most part, it's rather kind of just it's kind of like one of those dull, depressing stories. At least for me, it was kind of dull in that sense. And not only does it deal with the fact that he's coming from World War II, but also because he's dealing with the impacts of sort of racism, in particular from the Indian culture, as well as the sort of, I guess, white culture, because again, they bring up other races too, but they don't really go into the politics sort of. But it does mention how, like, the fact that he's a half-blood, it somehow makes him looked down upon, and makes him feel that he's inferior to the others that are related to him and that are part of his family. And so it kind of deals with that too. So it just brings it up, and almost too, I felt like that there were some parts of it too that were really focused in on trying to on trying to be, I think, open, though not in the sense of trying to blame white people for the problems that Native Americans have faced, because again the book does bring up that not all people that are from one particular race are necessarily good, and not everybody from another particular race is necessarily bad. So there is this kind of issue that comes up, that's sort of part of the story. But really it's sort of his self-journey. Like, if you like these kinds of journey type movies type books where one person suffers some major issue or problem and sort of kind of gets out of it. I guess this, I think, to me, this kind of aspect, I feel, comes off as more interesting and more engaging within film. When this is done throughout books and it's like a spiritual kind of journey, if there's no kind of compelling character, it really doesn't get me invested into the story. And I think there were times when I really liked how the book approached sort of the writing style, with like trying to create the sense of atmosphere and the sense of being in the desert. And again, it is emphasized that the Native American people live on sort of this reservation area, and that basically that's their home, and that's where a lot of them, again, to like raise cattle and things of that nature too. So there is this sense of the author trying to make it feel like you are in like that desert surrounding and in that atmosphere, and I think that it comes off really strongly. However, I would say it's just the whole approach that it takes. to me, I don't know if it just didn't feel as engaging. Like I wasn't really invested in what was going on. Because I felt like even the main character, I don't think was fully fleshed out. He just kind of is there to sort of represent the struggles that the Native Americans have faced, I guess, in particular during this time period. But I wouldn't say he's that compelling or interesting of a character. But ultimately, I still think the book is worth a recommendation. I just don't think it's my cup of tea after reading it. However, I think it can be interesting to some other people who find these kinds of stories of struggle and of hardship, and sort of getting getting some kind of fulfillment ultimately, despite those hardships. So I guess if you are into those kinds of stories, if you don't mind, some spiritual talk that really to me doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and I don't really know why it's in there, and if you don't mind that sort of ambiguity that this book has, then I think you will enjoy it fine. But yeah, I think ultimately that's really all I can say about Ceremony. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But I believe that's really all I can add. But I hope to see you all next time. Bye-bye.